Okay, I'm just gonna rip off the band-aid. Space Marine Mastercrafted Edition is overpriced. And by that, I mean it's overpriced with the amount of audiovisual updating that was done to it. And if you have the Anniversary Edition on PC platforms, there's no need to grab this. Now that I got that out of the way, let's get into the video proper. This week's video is going to be an interesting one. And the main reason for this is because it's technically the start of me kinda getting into Warhammer. That's right, I'm referring to the Mastercrafted edition of Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine. Originally released back on the PC, PS3, and Xbox 360 on September 6th, 2011. It was developed by Relic Entertainment and originally published by THQ. To put that into perspective, here's a list of games that came out in 2011. Bastion, Portal 2, Batman Arkham City, Dead Space 2, Gears of War 3, The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, the Nintendo 3DS and all of its launch library. And for an extra D6 of psychic damage, Instagram was barely a year old. You're welcome. And that sounds like a weird deal until you remember that Relic Entertainment were the developers of the critically acclaimed Dawn of War series. While I wasn't into 40k at the time, a lot of the questions I heard were along the lines of, how in the heck is a studio known primarily for real-time strategy games gonna make an action game? And the answer to that is gonna be really goddamn well. It did very well on the review front, and I'm assuming the sales front as well. And then THQ went out of business. And for a really long time, we didn't hear anything until 2021, when it was announced that Focus Entertainment and Saber Interactive got the rights, and announced that they were gonna make a sequel. And in 2024, Space Marine 2 was released. I did a couple of videos on it. I like that game quite a bit. And I gotta say, coming back to the remaster is interesting after all this time. But before I can go on with that, I gotta talk about the narrative stuff real quick. Space Marine places you in the power-armored boots of Dimitri and Titus, captain of the Ultramarines 2nd Company. They were deployed to ensure that an orc invasion force led by Warboss Grimskull doesn't loot a Warlord-class Titan from the Forge world of Graia, which is just a big stompy robot, and that's all we need to know for now. It becomes apparent quickly that things aren't what they seem after meeting Inquisitor Drogon and getting involved with his experiments. Because it wouldn't be a 40k narrative focused on the Imperium without the Inquisition fucking things up for everybody. I'll be the first to admit that this isn't quite as interesting a story as Space Marine 2's, but it does lay the foundations for a lot of what that game tackles between Titus's behavior around Chiron and Gadriel and all of the cool stuff that happens from there. Plus, it's a decent war story, but that has a lot to do with the fact that Space Marines and the Imperial Guard are the best factions in the setting for telling those kinds of stories. Case in point, anything involving Gaunt's ghosts. But that's not to say that it's all meat and potatoes. There's also these servo skulls that you can find that detail the lives and goings-on of the guardsmen and workers on Graia, and how they're trying to survive the invasion. And you get Drogon's journal through these skulls, which reveals things that I'm keeping quiet on. Overall, it's good stuff. Now I gotta talk about the gameplay and how that's different. The gameplay in Space Marine is a hybrid mix of third-person shooter and melee hack and slash. It also came out a little over 13 years ago, which means that while you can seamlessly switch between shooting and slashing on a dime, there is some jank involved with the process. A lot of this comes down to the fact that the game was developed for a controller first, so it makes sense with that kind of button mapping. Whereas on PC, you initially got the melee attack on the right mouse button, and the left control key is to aim down sights. I am not making this up. After some rejiggering, I managed to get right back into the purging. And who's on the purging menu today? The boys, the gits, the greenskins, the orcs. They're space orcs. But specifically, they're the comic relief faction of the setting because of how nonsensical they are. All of their technology is just thrown together trash that somehow just fucking works. They believe that specific colors do specific things, like red goes faster, yellow makes the biggest explosions, blue is the luckiest, green is the best, stuff like that. and they work on a might makes right philosophy that would be horrific if they weren't just green-skinned football hooligans. And surprisingly enough, these boys give way to possibly the biggest strength of Space Marine, which is its combat encounters. You got standard shooting galleries, hordes of dudes to melee, you got sniper sections, you even got turret sections, and these neat times when you get a jump pack and can crash down on enemies. It's really cool, and it was a pleasant surprise to see how this style of encounter design was expanded on with the sequel. But I will say that I prefer the feel of Space Marine 2 compared to the original. Replaying and basically getting through the first half of Space Marine has been a good learning experience. Mainly in the sense that the feel of a Space Marine in a third-person shooter wasn't quite dialed in yet. While you do fight a lot of orcs at a time, it obviously doesn't compare to the thousands upon thousands of Tyranids the sequel throws at you, or even the effects work done with the Thousand Suns, their cultists, and mutant Zangors. The feeling of how you move between the games is also worth talking about, because the first game is noticeably faster to the second game. But Space Marine 1 leans more into being a shooter, while the latter feels more like a true hybrid of shooting and slashing. A lot of this is because of the improvements they made to melee between the counter system and the retaliation shots. And while I do prefer Space Marine 2, Numero Uno has been a decent reminder of how different things were back in 2011, but also showcases how strong of a foundation the sequel had to work with. It was also a surprisingly forward-thinking game in one crucial way: executions. You see, Space Marines don't believe in using cover when seen in adaptations, because they are ceramite-covered brick shithouses that can tank most forms of conventional weaponry. But even they aren't fully invulnerable. To get around that, all you gotta do is weaken or stun an enemy in melee, and you can execute them with a gory finishing move to get a ton of health back. That's right, Space Marine is the inspiration for the glory kills of the modern Doom games. Or at least did them first. And you can tell because unlike in Doom 2016, there are times when doing executions when surrounded by enemies that you can just get completely murdered in the process. I guess that's why in Space Marine 2, it's swapped over to replenishing armor and using standard health packs. You also got a lot of guns. Various types of bolt gun, the sticky bomb firing vengeance launcher, a high-powered energy sniper rifle known as the las cannon, the shotgun-coated melt-a-gun, heavy plasma and heavy bolter rifles for specific set pieces. It's your standard 40k tinged third-person shooter arsenal. And while I like a lot of it, I again prefer a lot of the refinements in the sequel because of how much weightier and more powerful everything felt. I guess Call really beefed up those guns. Either way, this has been a very interesting experience when going back to play this for the video, because it's a testament to just how much Relic got right with the first draft. I'm not even joking, Space Marine 2 does a lot of iterating on this foundation that only becomes obvious when going back and playing this. And with that being said, between both games, can we please make it so that Space Marine 3 has us fighting orcs and Necrons? Because fighting the Greenskins and the Tin Boys in the Swarm engine would be fucking amazing. The former in particular would be a giant green wave and it'd be so good. Space Marine 1 holds up genuinely and remarkably well. Now that I got that out of the way, we gotta talk about the less than stellar parts of the package, namely the updates to presentation. Based on the playing that I've done in both the original version and Mastercrafted Edition, there are enough updates here that make it look like a fresher take on Space Marine, but overall, it's not enough to warrant the full price tag of $53.49 in Canuck bucks, especially with it being a bit on the buggy side as well. Because there were two instances when using the Vengeance Launcher, the sticky grenade launching gun, that caused my game to go to a black screen and automatically reload my last checkpoint as if I died, which is bizarre. So I did what I usually do and see what the general consensus was and check the Steam user reviews, and yowza, it's currently sitting at mostly negative. Granted, there are only 83 reviews at the time of recording. But even with that, I have to admit I still like the way this game looks, which is a credit to some very strong art direction. Warhammer 40k has always been a fantasy setting in space, but it really leans into it with a lot of the Imperium of man's gothic architecture and skull-laced motif. But a lot of it feels evocative of the aesthetics of the edition of the day. Space Marine was released in September 2011, a good 9 months before the launch of the tabletop game's 6th edition. And this is in an era before things started to get a little less grimdark. Still plenty grimdark, mind you, but it makes sense because of a bunch of lore stuff I'm not going to hit y'all with because I'm not in the business of inflicting unwarranted psychic damage. The character models all look like they were the most focused on because the textures look more detailed on them. Titus looks cool as heck, and it still feels weird hearing him be voiced by Mark Strong after getting used to Clive Standen, despite Strong being the original voice actor. So do Sidonis and that fucking square Leandros. And the orcs all look appropriately orky, although it looks like they're all rocking the black and white Goth Clan aesthetic as a means of being consistent. It's a nice but small facelift. Not a fan of the updated UI. It looks and feels weirdly out of place, and the audio feels weird, as in everything feels quieter except Titus and the music at times. That might just be me. Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine is still one of the finest examples of what it feels like to be a boots-on-the-ground Space Marine. And that's just with the campaign. You get into fights with overwhelming odds and you triumph every single time. It's a foundation so strong that all it needed to reach its full potential was new technology and iteration, as well as inspiring other games in the process. But the Mastercrafted Edition is an unfortunately poor way of experiencing this piece of game design history between its minuscule graphical updates, user interface that feels like a downgrade, and inferior audio mixing. If you want to play the original Space Marine, I highly recommend the Anniversary Edition. By the time this goes live, the Steam Summer Sale will be active and you can probably get it for cheap. But in my honest opinion, the Mastercrafted Edition of Space Marine is ultimately a poor remaster of a very good game. I hope it gets fixed, but in the meantime, it should probably be sent to the Death Watch for penance. Okay, that felt a bit more negative than I usually am on this channel. If you stuck around until now, thanks for watching, and be sure to like the video, it helps me out a lot. Same goes for subscribing if you haven't already. Thank you, have a wonderful weekend, and the Emperor protects.